When it comes to going places, you know and I know that nothing can equal a big horsepower Buick equipped with variable pitch Dynaflow.
What if I told you that the torque converter, the thing sitting at the heart of pretty much every automatic transmission on the road right now, was originally invented for ships? A German engineer named Hermann Foetinger patented it in 1905 to connect steam turbines to ship propellers. Then General Motors took that same concept, refined it for cars, and built one of the smoothest transmissions of the 1950s around it. And then, and I am not making this up, a Buick dealer in Florida tried to put it back in a boat. The boat hit 60 miles per hour on the water, but it had one problem nobody thought about until it was too late. You could not put the transmission in park. Not because it was broken, because on a boat, park does not mean anything. This is the story of the Buick Dynaflow, and the weirdest thing anyone ever tried to do with it. Now, to understand why anyone would bolt a car transmission into a speedboat, you have to understand what made the Dynaflow special in the first place. See, from 1948 through 1963, Buick was the only GM division that refused to use the corporate Hydra-Matic automatic. Every other division took the Hydra-Matic and was happy with it. Not Buick. The Hydra-Matic shifted hard, downright harsh on that 2-3 upshift, and Buick's driveline used a rigid torque tube on soft coil springs at the rear. A stiff shift would jolt the entire car. For a brand that sold itself on smooth and quiet, that was a deal breaker. They would not accept it. So a GM engineer named O.K. Kelly came up with a pretty wild fix. Just get rid of mechanical upshifts altogether. The Dynaflow used a 5-element torque converter with a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage. You would pull away from a stop, hit highway speed, and never feel a single shift the entire time. Because there was not one. There was no shift happening. People had opinions about this, and Dynaslush was the popular nickname, and I will be honest with you, it was not entirely unfair either. But most Buick buyers at the time were cruising, not drag racing, and for cruising, there was nothing on the road that was smoother. Nothing came close. So what does a transmission built for smooth cruising have to do with a speedboat? Well, that is where a Florida Buick dealer comes into the picture. In the late 1950s, Buick's division at General Motors partnered with Darby Buick in Sarasota, Florida, to test whether the Dynaflow could actually work in a boat. And on paper, the logic made sense. The very thing that made the Dynaflow feel sluggish on the road, that fluid no-shift power delivery where it just kind of pushed you along, that sounded like a dream for marine use. Smooth, constant torque, no jerky gear changes stressing the hull. For a boat application, that is pretty much exactly what you want. The boat they chose was a 21-foot Correct Craft. Now, if you do not know the name, Correct Craft is the oldest family-owned boat manufacturer in the world, founded in 1925 in Florida. Same company that would later build the Ski Nautique line. From the records I could find on this, and I will warn you, they are honestly pretty thin. It was more experiment than serious product plan. Nobody was drawing up production schedules. But they built the thing, and what happened next is where it gets interesting. So, what was actually under the deck of this thing? A Buick 364 cubic inch nailhead V8 with a 4-barrel Rochester carburetor, rated at about 300 gross horsepower. Now, the nailhead got its name from the unusual vertical position of its small-sized valves. They literally looked like nail heads sticking up out of the cylinder head, which is a weird look if you have never seen one. I have covered Buick engines on this channel before, and the nailhead always gets a reaction from people because it just looks different from everything else that was out there. That valve layout was actually the engine's secret weapon, though. Because even though the valves were small, Buick compensated with a cam profile that had higher lift and longer duration, and the result was an absolute torque monster down low. The 364 in high-performance trim could put out 400 foot-pounds of torque at 3,200 RPM. For a boat, where what you want is strong, steady pull, rather than screaming top-end horsepower, that kind of low-end torque curve was exactly right. It was almost like the engine was built for this application, even though obviously it was not. Behind the engine sat the Dynaflow transmission, same unit you would find in a Buick LeSabre or Roadmaster, sitting in somebody's driveway in suburban America. Nothing modified about it as far as I can tell. And the results, at least on paper, were pretty impressive. That 21-foot Correct Craft prototype hit approximately 60 miles per hour on the water, which, for a boat in the late 1950s, was a seriously quick number. The torque converter delivered smooth, uninterrupted power to the prop, and once it was up to speed, it felt exactly the way you would hope it would feel. Smooth, consistent, no drama. But here is where things went sideways. Two problems showed up, and both of them came from the same place. The transmission was designed for a car. A boat is not a car, seems obvious now. Was apparently not obvious to anybody in Sarasota on day one. Problem number one was reverse. The Dynaflow's planetary gear set could engage reverse no problem, but the gear ratio was built for a 4,000-pound sedan backing out of a parking space at 2 miles an hour, not for a 21-foot boat trying to maneuver in a marina. The amount of force it put through the prop in reverse made the boat genuinely hard to control going backwards. Dangerously hard to control in some situations from what I have read. Now, in fairness, this one could have been fixed. Different gear ratios, maybe a different final drive setup. Solvable problem if somebody wanted to spend the money. Problem number two was not solvable. And this is the detail that I think is the most fascinating engineering lesson in this whole story. Because it is one of those things that seems completely obvious after somebody explains it to you, but I guarantee nobody was thinking about it beforehand. On every car with an automatic transmission, park works by engaging a small pin called a parking pawl that locks into a notched ring on the output shaft, physically prevents the shaft from turning. But that system only works because of one assumption that nobody ever thinks about. The car has tires. The tires are sitting on pavement. The pavement does not move. The drivetrain does not move. The parking pawl holds everything in place, and the system works perfectly. On a boat, there are no tires. There is no pavement. There is nothing fixed down there. The prop is sitting in open water, and if the current pushes the boat, the prop turns. And the parking pawl either does not engage at all, or worse, it engages and then gets sheared clean off, because the force is coming from the wrong direction entirely. The transmission was not designed for loads on the output shaft when it is supposed to be stationary. That is just not a scenario the engineers at GM ever thought about, because why would they? Turns out a boat does not really care that you move the lever to park. There is nothing down there to hold on to. So was it a failure? Well, kind of, but a fascinating one. Despite hitting 60 miles per hour and proving that the Dynaflow could deliver smooth, usable power on the water, the reverse torque problem and the park problem together were enough to kill any chance of this going into production. The Dynaflow never saw marine service outside of this one experiment. Now, it's worth pointing out that putting car engines in boats was absolutely not unusual in this period. Companies like Gray Marine had been taking automotive engines from Studebaker, Pontiac, Continental, and General Motors and marinizing them for decades before this. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer in World War II actually used a torque converter transmission, called the Torquematic, that was a direct ancestor of the Dynaflow, which is a connection I did not know about until I started researching this video and I thought was pretty wild. So the idea of using automotive drivetrain components in non-automotive applications had been around for a long time, and it wasn't crazy at all. The problem wasn't the concept, it was the execution, and more specifically, it was the assumptions. The Dynaflow was engineered from the ground up for one very specific environment, which was a heavy American sedan on American roads, and every single thing baked into the design. From the reverse ratio, to the parking mechanism, to the fluid cooling capacity, all of it assumed that environment. You take it out of that context and those hidden assumptions surface immediately, and you find out real fast what was designed and what was just assumed. The Dynaflow name itself was actually dropped after 1958, but the transmission kept going under a different name, Turbine Drive, at Buick through 1963. Over its life, it evolved through several versions. The original 5-element converter was first, then the twin-turbine Dynaflow showed up in '53 with a dedicated planetary gear set that actually gave it a proper shift point. And finally, the flight-pitch Dynaflow in 1958, which got renamed the triple turbine. If you watched my TurboGlide video, you already know about that last one. It was ambitious. It was also full of bugs. Buick pulled the plug after just 2 years. If there's one word for the Dynaflow today, I think it's misunderstood. The people who called it Dynaslush were mostly the kind of people who wouldn't have bought a Buick in the first place. Among actual Buick owners, the ones who wanted quiet, smooth highway cruising and didn't care about 0 to 60 times, the Dynaflow was genuinely well regarded. Buick offered manual transmissions through the entire Dynaflow era, and almost nobody bought them. That tells you something right there. As for the boat, as far as I can tell, that original 21-foot correct craft prototype has been lost to time. It lives on in a handful of forum posts and a couple footnotes in Dynaflow technical references, and that's about it. Which is honestly a shame, because I would love to see that thing if it still existed somewhere.